Thank you, Marge, and thank you very much to the organising committee for the opportunity to talk to you today. I also want to thank many people who are in this room and outside this room for bringing an outsider, me, into this field. I hope you're not regretting it. Why do I say an outsider? Well, the title of Michael and I's talks look really quite similar. They both say leveraging behavioural science. But there's 3 letters missing from the title of my talk, and it's the word pet. So I'm not a pet behavioural scientist. I do not, as you'll see as the examples I give as the talk goes on, I do not understand animals or why they behave the way they do. I'm a human psychologist. I am human, but I also study humans. And so I bring the human behavioural science, an understanding of human behaviour to the problem of obesity among companion animals. And so what I'd like to do today is to talk to you about a program of research that I've been doing in collaboration with many colleagues at Purina, but most recently, for a while, Hugues Duplessis, and quite recently, Libby Sheridan, who's done some wonderful work championing the role of behavioural science in tackling obesity. So just to give a little bit more background about me, as I say, I'm a psychologist. Did a PhD nearly 20 years ago now, it's quite scary, on the role of motivation in shaping behaviour. So if you're really motivated to do something, you currently drink 2 cups of coffee a day, and you want to drink no cups of coffee a day, how much of an effect does being motivated to reduce the amount of coffee that you drink have on your behaviour? That's what I did my PhD on. The answer is not as much as you think. And actually, that's quite obvious in retrospect, but actually that was news, and still that paper's my most cited paper, so that must be news to people. We'll come back to the idea, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, that, it's not enough simply to want to do something. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're able to do that thing. So what I did and I went on to do after that is I was really interested in this idea of how do we bridge this gap to steal Jason's, but we've both been talking about it in parallel, bridging the gap between motivation and action. How do we help people translate these good intentions into action? And that's why I publish papers on self-monitoring, so keeping track of what you're doing, where you are in relation to your goals, and also planning, so making plans in advance. And we're going to talk about both these ideas today because I've been trying to translate them into this field. So until 2015, none of this had anything to do with pets, obesity, or veterinary science, until I got an email from Purina to invite me to come and talk at the Companion Animal Nutrition Summit in Barcelona. I don't know if Dottie's in the room today. She's over there. Thank you, Dottie, for that email. I've told this story before. I thought it was spam. Because, when you're an academic, those of you who are academics in the room, you get emails to talk at all sorts of odd conferences from people who just don't understand what you do, or they're just spam sending thousands of emails, come and talk to a conference in China about this. And I thought, why is someone asking me to come and talk at a veterinary conference? But I read down the email, and it was, clearly Dottie had read the work and thought, actually, and the work then that I think that Dottie had read was about a paper I'd written on the ostrich problem, which one of the reasons that people struggle to achieve the things they want to achieve is that they bury their heads in the sand and they ignore the problem. There are lots of things in life that we don't want to confront. And one of the things that I say we, I'm letting myself into your field now, the veterinary profession might not be confronting was the challenge of obesity. And so that's what I talked about in 2015. And since then, I've been working with Purina because one of their 10 commitments to society that they made in 2016 was about helping to reduce the risk of pet obesity through collaborative prevention programs. And it was really nice that they saw work on psychology and behavioural science as part of that collaboration. I probably don't need to do the next slide, to be honest, given I'm the last speaker in an afternoon about the pet obesity epidemic. The statistic that I've got, but there are lots of other ones, is it seems like about 6 in 10 dogs and cats are overweight. It's more normal for a dog or a cat to be overweight than it is for them to be a normal weight. And we know that that's problematic for a range of reasons. And we also know, and other talks this afternoon have told us this, that risk factors for obesity are multi-component, multifactorial, and they include factors pertaining to the dog, but they also include factors pertaining to the owner, because the owners typically feed and exercise these dogs. So, just one of the statistics that I like is a study by Lawrence Colliard in 2006, found that dogs that were fed treats were 1.68 times more likely to be overweight than dogs that weren't fed treats. So clearly part of the challenge in addressing obesity among companion animals is to understand and potentially change owners' behaviour. So my aim today is to tell you a little bit about how behavioural science can help us to do this. So what do I mean I'm going to say I mean by behavioural science, because there are a range of different definitions, and I think it's important for me to say the standpoint that I come from, and that's also especially important given that we've just been hearing about pet behavioural science, to distinguish these disciplines. I was really pleased. Firstly, the UN have written a report on behavioural science. I was just like, it's seriously like a big thing. I used to talk about the coalition government in the UK, coalition government back in 2010 set up the Behavioural Insights team. And they were the first government team to really put behaviour of citizens and targeting the behaviour of citizens at the forefront of efforts to solve societal discontents and solve problems. But now, the UN have now written a report on behavioural science. And they define behavioural science as the evidence-based study of how people behave, how they make decisions, and how they respond to programs, policies, and incentives. So I really like the fact that it says evidence-based. The point is here, we're trying to apply science to understand people's behavior. We're trying to gather data, use that data to understand what's going on, and then to use that understanding to inform the interventions. And behavioral science is typically allied to disciplines like psychology, economics, sociology, geography, politics, quite a lot of the social sciences, but it's not really applied, it's becoming increasingly applied in veterinary science, and I think that's a wonderful thing. And I think that behavioural science should be alongside those other disciplines as one of the areas where behavioural science is critical, because especially in the context of companion animals, we're talking about people as well as the animal. I think I'm preaching to the converted on that, so I won't go on about it. So the reason that many people are interested in behavioural science, and why a lot of us are lay psychologists, in a sense we're all lay psychologists, because we want to understand people's behaviour. People are complicated creatures, and we often see somebody do something, and we think, why did they do that? Why did the person in front of us in the queue for coffee in the last break put 4 sugars in their coffee? Were they thinking, I'm going to have to listen to a psychologist, I need more glucose, or I'm never going to make it through till tea? Are they addicted to sugar? So we speculate on the reasons for people's behavior. And often people's behavior seems out of line with what they say they're trying to do. So someone will say, I try to walk 30 minutes a day. I try to avoid processed food. I definitely try and regularly flea and worm my dog or my cat. But yet their behavior doesn't seem to align with those intentions. And so that's why we wrote this paper. This is actually a summary of work. This was published in 2016 with this is my PhD supervisor, Pascal Sheeran, who's now at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. But we wrote this review together on the intention-behavior gap, this idea that there is a big gap between what people want to do and what they're motivated to do and what actually happens. And some motivation isn't alone, and isn't enough, and we're going to come back to that. So people are interested in why people don't behave in ways that appear to be in their best interests, or for the purposes today, in their animals' best interests. And we're interested in understanding that, because if we can understand, then potentially we can start to change behavior with a view to improving outcomes. So is there any potential here? Should we be considering owners' behavior? Should we be targeting owners' behavior, or should we be doing something completely different? poo tablets. Sorry. Should we be doing something different? I think there is potential here. So in 2018, we did it was a brief review, because actually I wanted it to be a longer review, but there weren't that very many studies. So it was a brief review of studies that had used interventions designed to help owners to change their behavior in order to manage weight. And we found 14 studies published at that point up to 2018. And we found that actually there was potential here. So we did a meta-analysis, which is where you average the effects across all of the studies, and we found that on average, there was a medium-sized effect of interventions targeting owners' behavior. So medium-sized effects are a good thing, definitely some benefit there. And the effects were relatively consistent across the studies. But it was also clear that that conclusion was based on a very small number of studies, and the evidence base was very much in its infancy. And it was also, and I hope I'm not being rude to anybody in this room here, well, actually it applies to behavioral science in general. We are rubbish at reporting what we're doing. Rubbish at it. So Susan Mickey, who's someone I'm going to talk about in a moment, says that behavioral scientists, they're like, what they do is they go, it's like a drug company saying, we gave somebody a big red pill and they got better. That's the level at which we're describing behavioral interventions. You wouldn't do that in the pharmaceutical industry. So we go, people came in and they did 4 hours of workshops, 1 a week for 4 weeks, and then at the end we measured the weight of their dog at the end of the 4 weeks. It's like, well, what did you do in the workshops? We talked to them about how they feed and exercise. What did you say to them about how they feed and exercise? What specific techniques did they employ? What if it worked and it was a brilliant thing? We need to know that so that somebody else can replicate it. So they were reporting problems. So since then, there have been many studies, and we've been working in this area, and many of you in the room have been working in this area. So how can I use this time helpfully today? What I want to try and do is present a principled and systematic approach to designing behavioral interventions. I want to do like a mini workshop on how to design behavioral interventions in a principled and systematic way, in the hope that that will mean that the science, which is currently in its infancy but is developing very rapidly, can do so in the best possible way, and a way that avoids a lot of the mistakes that have been made in other fields. So one of the nice things about this is that behavioral science and behavioral interventions have a long history in other fields. Health psychology is the obvious example. Helping people to exercise more, eat appropriately, wear masks in enclosed areas, whatever behavior is of particular interest to health psychologists at a particular moment, we apply this principled approach. So what we're doing here is not designing anything new, and we can be pleased as veterinary scientists that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. What we can do is apply, helpfully, the wheel. And I say the wheel because what I want to present to you today is this, is adapted from a guide that was developed by Susan Mickey and her colleagues at University College London called the Behaviour Change Wheel. And it was, the subtext is a guide to designing interventions. I still don't understand why it's called a wheel. I've been working with this for 10 years. To me, it's got 3 steps. And it's even described in the book as 3 stages. So we're going to talk through 3 stages, and they're linear. But there is this wheel, and I never quite get how you go from the middle to the outside. If anyone gets it, but it is called the wheels. So, as I say, 3 stages, which are what we're going to try and work through in this talk. Stage 1, understanding the behavior. So, what does understanding the behavior mean? It means defining the problem in behavioral terms. So the problem is not that the dog or the cat or another animal is overweight. That's the outcome. Can we understand that outcome in behavioral terms by looking at the behavior of the owners that have an impact on that animal? And we think about which behaviors have the most significant impact on that problem. So this parallels some of the things that Jason was talking about earlier today. You were talking about making a thorough assessment of the situation, and part of that includes the owner's behaviour. So thinking about it in behavioural terms, and working out exactly what the target behaviours are. So why do you have a picture of one of the most beautiful dogs in the world? This is Teddy. I think one of the nice things about working in this field is you can put a picture of your own dog on the screen. And I just asked this question because I have to ask this in all talks. Has anybody in your professional practice or personal lives come across a Schnauzer crossed with a Lancashire Heeler? I've still yet to have a yes to that. I've talked to so many veterinary professionals. It's possible. Teddy has a brother. So Teddy is not completely unique. But it is possible there are only 2 of these animals in the world. And he's lovely, but there is also a number of good reasons, I think, why there won't be many more Schnauzers crossed with Heelers. I don't know how much of it's specific to Teddy, but he does have his problems. So what's Teddy doing here? Teddy is sat on the back of my sofa looking out the window. And on the other side of the window, we've got some trees between us and the next house, and the trees are infested with squirrels. So Teddy's greatest joy, if there's nothing else happening and he's bored, he'll sit on the back of the sofa and observe the squirrels. That's absolutely fine, except that Ted doesn't just observe the squirrels, he likes to tell them that he's there, and so he barks loudly. I've been working at home a lot in the pandemic. I like working at home, actually, in general. But I usually work upstairs. I have a very nice study upstairs. But the dogs kind of live downstairs, and so I feel a bit bad. Right? So I think, well, I'll go and sit with Teddy, be fine. And we've got another dog, a Patterdale called Tidge. So I think I'll go and sit downstairs on the sofa while I work on this. And sometimes, even if it's people I talk to a lot, I'll even do video calls downstairs. And then, of course, Teddy decides he's going to do this. I don't understand animals particularly. I'm not anywhere near the level that Michael is at in terms of training. I haven't gone through, we did go to a few puppy classes with Teddy, and I'm trying. But I'm afraid that my best way of getting Teddy off the sofa, especially if I'm on a video call, is you flick the piece of kibble into the middle of the room. Teddy comes down off the sofa, has the piece of kibble, and usually thinks he might do something else. So I can imagine Teddy's not the leanest of animals, although because there are no other Schnauzers crossed with Lancashire Heelers, my partner tells me that that's what a Lancashire Heeler crossed with a Schnauzer should look like. But the point being that I could imagine myself, it hasn't happened yet, going to the vet for a consultation, maybe about something else, and them saying that Ted is carrying a bit more weight than he should be carrying, talking to me if they were interested, and this is the way I think a good consultation should go, exploring the situation, learning about, I tell them my little anecdote about Ted driving me mad when I'm on a conference call and they think, well, there's the behaviour. And if they were a conscientious veterinary professional interested in working from a behavioural perspective, they might think, well, how can I work with this owner? And so you'd explore the target behaviour in as much detail as possible. And what that means is thinking about, how often does this behaviour occur? If it's very, very rarely, then it's not a big problem. Who in the household is doing this behaviour? Because I think many of you will realise that the person who's in the consulting room with the animal isn't perhaps necessarily the person you need to be talking to. I'm thinking of grandma here. And then the bit where I get really excited as a psychologist is the 4th stage, because that's where we can start to try and play or maybe even be psychologists and work out, well, what's driving that behaviour? Why is the person behaving in that way? So what we're doing here is making a behavioural diagnosis. And I actually think that word, diagnosis, might sound a bit grand, and maybe I'm offending some of you from a medical background by using the term diagnosis. But I actually think if we can elevate what to some people seems like a social science issue around someone's behaviour to a medical issue, or making a diagnosis of the problem, then it somehow makes people take it a little bit more seriously. You diagnose a problem, and then you treat that problem based on the diagnosis. And I think that based on the diagnosis bit, is another bit that's really important, something a lot of behavioral scientists don't do. They don't link that assessment, that behavioral diagnosis, through to the proposed strategy. So I actually want to give you a quote from Susan Mickey in the book, because it says, she says, the importance of devoting sufficient time and resources to select, specify, and fully understand the behavior to be changed cannot be overstated. If the assessment is not thorough, and the formulation of the problem is less likely to be accurate, and the intervention less likely to be effective. To take a medical analogy, if a doctor does not conduct a thorough assessment of a patient's symptoms, an accurate diagnosis is unlikely to be made, and therefore the treatment may be wrong. Right? So I actually think this medicalization of behavior in this context could potentially be very helpful. And I'd like to actually extend that even further, because one of the key challenges that I know veterinarians say about this sort of work, and especially as I'm about to bombard you with 29 minutes of how you deliver a behavioral intervention, is I don't have the time to do that. I'm sorry, there are no user-friendly tools. We're working on those, but currently there are no really user-friendly tools to do this. I don't have the time. But perhaps if we can adopt this medicalization of it, you can say, what I'm doing here is a behavioral consultation. And we hear about behavioral consultations, but we hear about them in dealing with the behavior of the dog or the cat. The dog's biting and nipping people, so you have a behavioral consultation to talk to a professional about why that dog's nipping people. Dog owners always say nipping, like it's not a problem biting. Why the dog's biting people? But I think we could do exactly the same thing with owners. So, like I say, the bit that excites me about this is the fourth step, where we try and drill down and work out why that behavior is occurring. And the behavior change wheel suggests that this question can be approached using the COM-B model, which proposes that all behavior is driven by three factors. All three of these factors need to be in place for a behavior to occur. So the first factor is motivation. And that comes back to our previous point. The person must want to change their behavior. And so education, persuasion are important. But as we know from the Proverbs, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, from the wonderful review written by Sheeran and Webb in 2016, which I know you've all enjoyed, there is a gap between intentions and action, and we know that motivation doesn't necessarily translate into action. But the COM-B model says, well, no, motivation alone is not enough. You might think that's absolutely obvious, but you wouldn't believe the number of models in psychology that are still used today that have a direct line between intention and behavior without much else driving behavior. Theory of planned behavior, protection motivation theory, the health belief model, lots and lots of things. The COM-B model says, no, you also need capability. There's no point being motivated to do something if you aren't capable of doing it. And that can be capability of addressing the problem in another way. So Tom, the untrained dog owner, has no other way of getting Ted off the back of the sofa when he's barking at the squirrels. So in that sense, he lacks the capability to direct the behavior in another way. So capability refers to having the knowledge, skills, stamina to perform the behavior. But you also need opportunity. So there needs to be a conducive physical and social environment. And it might be that the physical and social environment is, what's the opposite of conducive? Not conducive. Is not conducive to the behavior. So one simple solution might be, Tom, move your sofa. Right? If Ted can't see out the window, and actually Tom was pleased with himself because he did come up with an alternative to throwing the treats on the floor. Curtains. Why didn't I think of that before? There's not enough room to move the sofa, but now I pull the curtains. So people wonder why I do video calls in the dark, but it means that Ted goes to sleep. But the point being, you need all three factors to be in place for behavior to occur. So what we wanted to do, this was the first work that I did with Purina, was actually to explore some of the challenges that owners reported managing or helping overweight dogs to lose weight. But actually, the focus groups we ran were not all with people who had overweight dogs. They were just dog owners in general. And we got them to talk about some of the challenges that they encountered. But we did that clever thing that behavioral scientists sometimes do, where people might not want to report something that, we said, what kind of challenges do you think you or other dog owners that you know might encounter? And then people are much more willing to say, oh, this person I've heard about. And they tell you something much more interesting. But what we found is that the challenges that owners were reporting divided quite neatly into these three factors. And so I think there is some mileage in when you're doing your behavioral diagnosis, when you're doing your assessment, trying to think, well, is what that person's telling me a problem of motivation, a problem that reflects capability or lack of capability, or a problem that reflects a lack of opportunity? So start with motivation. We found some evidence that owners aren't motivated to take action. So people would say things like, dog's happier carrying a bit of weight. It means if I'm late home from work, he isn't hungry, he's got some reserves to call upon. Or if he's out in the cold, he keeps him warm. And look at him, he's happy, people have this sort of belief. Who was it that said that fat dogs are cute? Was that you, Michael? Yeah, so people have this belief that, the dog is just happier carrying a bit of weight. So obviously that undermines people's motivation. Why would you take action, make the dog miserable by cutting back its food, even though in the long term you're improving outcomes? And the other thing we noticed is that feeding behavior is motivated very often by things other than the weight or health of that animal. So we know that feeding serves all sorts of functions. It helps get cats on scales. That's helpful. But it also helps you to feel like the dog is part of the family. So, you're celebrating a special occasion. You don't want your dog to feel left out. So a dog gets a bit of birthday cake. Then dog feels like it's, one of the family. And obviously, the love thing, showing your affection, your love for the animal by giving it a treat. Ted probably doesn't love me, but he does love having a bit of kibble thrown on the carpet, and he just about associates that with me, and that's enough to tolerate living with me. But it's not just about motivation. There's some of the more obvious things that I think we all know about. We also saw things that related to a lack of capability. And one of the strongest ones here was knowledge. So that does fit with the idea of a knowledge gap and the idea that one of our roles as veterinary professionals is to provide information. So owners would say things like, I have no idea what or how much to feed my dog. So the guidelines just say small, medium, large. I don't know what he is. He's sort of in between, and no one's ever crossed these two breeds, so there aren't any of these about. There's actually, people say things like, there isn't enough information on the packaging of pet food. So I'm sure people in the room have got views on labeling. There is actually good information on the labels of main meal food, but treats are much more problematic, especially loose treats that you can buy, I know, in lots of pet food shops. But also, that's an easy blame, isn't it? So people say, oh, I would feed the appropriate amount of food, but I have no idea how many calories are in this. Well, what about you? Food labeling for humans is ubiquitous. It's on everything. How many of us look at those labels? We don't, do we? We shop based on habits. So I think that can be a bit of an excuse. I don't think that necessarily putting the information on the pet food is some sort of panacea for change. And if we sorted that problem and knew how many calories were in a pig's ear that you buy in the shop, that suddenly this would be solved. But other challenges related to capability, so lots of owner factors here pertain to exercise. So, feeling fit and well enough yourself to exercise the dog is an important one. Some people would say things like, my dog doesn't like exercise. No, he doesn't like it. But the other thing, one thing I'd like to say, he doesn't like rain. That was what the comment that came off it. That you open the door, the lead on, the dog goes, whoosh. But I slightly laughed at that, because at the time, so I was a cat owner, I was telling this to Michael before. I'm a former cat owner, and I've become a dog owner. So my partner had dogs, and when I met her, we tried the whole cat-dog thing, but we moved to dogs. But yeah, I didn't really believe this, but actually one of the dogs that we had previously wouldn't go out in the garden if it was raining. So he'd wait to toilet until it stopped raining. So I do believe that some dogs don't like the rain. Obvious concern, lacks the capability. My dog reacts badly to other people and dogs, so I can't take them out. And finally, people said things that reflected challenges around opportunity. So obviously time is a big challenge to opportunity. Having a suitable area to walk the dog. But the other interesting thing about opportunity is that people don't notice opportunities. So sometimes a problem with opportunity can be not identifying it. So not identifying that actually, you see in this work on where you change the size of the bowls and people feed less in a smaller bowl than in a larger bowl. Well, not realizing that the size of the bowl represents an opportunity for you to actually easily nudge yourself into feeding a little bit less. The technology that Michael talked about, recognizing the opportunities potentially afforded by technology for changing the way you feed could be quite powerful. But also not recognizing potential threats that can derail good intentions. So not recognizing, so who looks after the dog when you go out, when you go to work, when you come to the conference? So Teddy and Tidge are currently in the loving care of my in-laws. They did have a dog 15 years ago, a Bichon Frise. I think they'll be all right. We have given a piece of paper next to where the dog is fed with, not a weighing family, that's bad, isn't it, for being up here. We're a scoop family, but it does say, how many scoops to divide between the two of them and what times of the day and so on. But this is failing to recognize that's a potential threat to your great feeding regime. Okay, let's move on a little bit. So we know that there are challenges that people encounter maintaining the weight of their companion animals. And we know, and we can see some evidence in these focus groups, that those challenges reflect challenges around motivation, challenges around capability, challenges around opportunity. Which one of those three factors is the biggest determinant of behavior? I'm afraid the answer to that is rather boring. It's all of them. But we kind of wanted to show that. We kind of wanted to show that you do need all three to have an impact on behavior. And so in this paper, it's a big sort of questionnaire survey of over 3,000 dog owners across five countries, France, Germany, the UK, Italy, and Russia, actually. And they completed these measures. And they also submitted a photograph of their dog so that experts could assess the body condition score. That was a really interesting process. So I didn't do the Slido. I should have done the Slido so you could vote. Try and have a guess. Just think, if 3,000 dog owners, what proportion of them do you think submitted a photo that you could accurately assess the body condition score from? We gave them instructions. Take a photo of the dog from the top, like you do, and then photo of the dog from the side. Preferably not a photo of the dog doing something, but move. What proportion? We've had 0, 40, 50, about half, actually. So we were kind of pleased, and there'd been a paper on this before, and we found so you can accurately code body condition score from photos, but those photos have to be good photos. So you can't code body condition score. Sorry, I should have said, how do we know we accurately coded it? A small subset of these owners, I think it's about 100 or so, were brought into veterinary practice and a professional assessed the body condition score of the animal. And we compared that with the coders' ratings. So the coders' ratings were accurate for around the half of owners that submitted photos. So it suggests that if you're doing an online study, you can get owners to submit photos of their dog, but you're going to lose about half of the data, half of the participants. That might be something that's worth doing in terms of cost-benefit analysis, because compared to bringing the animals into a practice and weighing them on multiple occasions, it might be something that's worth doing. And maybe owners could be trained to take better photos, or the dogs could be trained to stand still. It's also a very enjoyable process because the other 50% of photos were really great fun. Lots of things, pictures of like Jack Russells throwing themselves into swimming pools and various other things. And so the owners also completed measures of factors relating to motivation. So do you think that obesity is a serious issue? Do you think your dog is vulnerable to obesity? So trying to get at this idea, are you motivated to tackle this problem if you think it exists? issues around capability, and issues around opportunity. And with opportunity, one of the things that we focused on there was whether you've got social support from others, particularly within the household. So, many dogs and cats live in multiple person households, and those people are not necessarily aligned in the way in which they think or how motivated they are to do things. No, one way around that is to allocate roles. So one person feeds the dog if they're the person that's, it sounds bad to say interested in feeding the dog, but you know what I mean, interested in doing it properly or takes charge of that, takes responsibility of that. But then what happens in between those feedings as well. But all of these factors were associated with the body condition scores. So it helped to validate the prediction that the COM-B model can be applied in this context, just as it's been applied in other contexts. Okay, we've done stage 1. Stage 2 and stage 3 are quicker. We've done our behavioral diagnosis. So we've defined the problem in behavioral terms, and then we've played, or now we've heard from the psychologist. We can be psychologists. We can try and understand the reasons behind that behavior. Now I really want us to try and use that understanding to develop better interventions. And these, when we're thinking about interventions, the behavior change wheel is probably thinking about population-level interventions. So delivering public health campaigns to people around eating 5 fruit and vegetables a day. Or it might be thinking about helping researchers who are interested in a particular problem to design intervention and test it in a randomized controlled trial. But we can also be thinking about intervention on a one-to-one basis in the context of a consultation with a client. So when I'm talking about interventions here, I'm not necessarily just talking about something you could deliver, so Purina are working with me and the team to develop an intervention. Probably shouldn't say more about it now. More news soon when it becomes public. We're developing something that can be delivered in veterinary practices. But it's a standard intervention which is applied across, helps the support owners in making changes to the weight of their animals. But you can also use this sort of model to work on an intervention for a particular client. So the second stage is very much about thinking about, what do I want this intervention to achieve? What's the function of the intervention? And the behavior change wheel talks about 9 potential functions. And I think that's important because we can pick out the most obvious one. It's probably the top one for many of you. So many of you were thinking, the main thing I want to do is I want to educate. I want to inform the person in front of me that A, their dog is carrying too much weight, and that B, the way in which they're feeding and exercising is contributing to the weight of that animal. And I might go down another level. I might say, well, I'll also try to do some bit of persuading here, because the person might need a little bit of persuading. Or, now that I've listened or heard about the COM-B model, I might think, well, actually, the problem's not necessarily about motivation. The person's really motivated. They recognize the problem, they want to do something, but they aren't capable of doing it. And so I might think, well, the main function of my intervention might be to impart some skills upon this person. If they struggle to walk the animal because dog goes completely loopy if it sees another dog, then maybe the owner needs some training in helping to walk the dog and distract the dog and keep the dog's attention when another dog comes the other way. So we think about the potential functions of the intervention. And we can see, as I think I've alluded to, that the majority of interventions currently delivered fit into the category of education and persuasion. So the body condition score is actually, the body condition system is a good example of this, because the veterinary profession is trying to provide information on the appropriate weight for that cat or that dog in an effort to educate them, potentially challenge their belief that their dog is not actually of an ideal weight. It's worth pointing out that it's perhaps understandable that we haven't moved to some of these other intervention functions, and there's a question about whether we should be. Should we be coercing people? Should we be saying, I'm going to stop treating your cat or dog if it continues to gain weight at this rate? People don't do that, don't we? We don't withdraw treatment from things. Restriction. Possibly, should we be restricting the sale of certain types of food? So I don't know if any of you heard of the Nuffield Foundation. I think they're a UK funding council. They developed something called the Ladder of Interventions, which I think had about 11 rungs on it. And they moved from education, the first sort of thing, right down to laws, legislation, banning stuff. And what the Nuffield Foundation said is that you want to do the most effective thing, but staying as close to the least coercive way. So if two interventions are comparably effective, go for the less aversive one. Or keep working your way down until you find one that's effective. So the absolute last resort is banning stuff. But we might tax things. The UK government's got a sugar tax. I don't know if other governments have got sugar taxes. So we tax things that we don't want people to do, to restrict and disincentivize. But we might not be at the stage of full-on coercion or worse. So as I say, the dominant approach so far is persuasion education, but we know that they're not enough. So what I think, one of the key observations I want you to take away from today's talk is we need to shift our interventions to focus more on capability and opportunity. And I actually think that's a really nice message for owners, because you're no longer saying, you've got this wrong. What you're saying is, I know you want to do the right thing, I know you know what's right, but I also know it's very hard for you to do that, and it's very challenging. I'm here to help you on this journey. Here's some stuff you might try. Right? And then you help them to feel more capable, maybe be more capable, and to identify good opportunities to act, and identify things that are knocking them off course. And then, some of the work started to go in this area. So we tried to ask people to make plans. So a lot of the work that I'd done up to before I started doing work in relation to companion animals was on the effects of planning. And a quite famous psychologist, Peter Gollwitz, a German psychologist, came up with the idea of if-then planning or implementation intentions. Implementation intentions basically say, well, if you want to do something, that's not enough. You need to do two more things. You need to identify a good opportunity in which to act and a suitable response to that opportunity. So that opportunity can be something that derails your good intentions. So if my dog is begging for food, then I will, and you think about an appropriate alternative response, maybe play with the dog. Or it can be a good opportunity to act. So if I'm feeding my dog in the morning, then I will weigh the food using this, or feed in the blue bowl rather than the red bowl today. And this type of planning, there was a big meta-analysis it's old now, 2006, but over 100 studies in 2006 found it has a significant effect over and above motivation. So lots of really good evidence that people who are motivated and have a plan do a lot better than people who are just motivated. So I thought, all I have to do is translate this into veterinary science, and Purina are going to be pleased with me, I'm going to be pleased with me, and I've got a nice paper. It didn't work. It's my fault it didn't work. I was the stupid psychologist. Because what the stupid psychologist who's often new to an area does is he or she, but probably more likely he, embeds his intervention, in this case my sheet designed to help people make plans, at the end of 20 pages of questionnaire. What was I thinking? I just thought, I really want to measure owners' beliefs about feeding and exercise. So I want to understand their attitudes, and I want to control for these things, and then I'll see what effect planning has on people. And so obviously by the time if they got to the end of the questionnaire, they were pretty fed up. Only half of them got to the end of the questionnaire, and the ones that didn't really make a plan. There is good news. And the good news is that I've been working with the Pet Food Manufacturers Association. I think actually thanks to an introduction from you, Marge, so thank you very much. And we've been working to make the tool a lot more user-friendly. And so they've taken me off the job. They've asked me to tell them what it needs to do, and then they've got a design and creative agency in to make it really user-friendly. And they're going to host it on their Healthy Weight Hub. So their annual conference is Wednesday, and I'm annoyingly not flying back in time. But they're going to release talk about the tool then, and then it's going to be released later in the year, and it's got all sorts of animations and exciting stuff on it. So I really think it'll be a user-friendly tool that owners can use. Okay, I'm running out of time. So we've talked a little bit about intervention content, which is the final stage. The focus here is slightly distinguishing between the function of the intervention, which is what it's wanted to try to do, and then exactly what it will do, which is the behavior change techniques. So all I want to do in the last part of this talk is just make you aware of the huge number of potential ways that you can change people's behavior or help them to change their own behavior. Sorry, change people's behavior sounds a bit coercive. Help them to change their own behavior. Because I think people think, well, there's only 3 or 4 things I can try. It's 93. Probably more than 93, because this was published in 2013. So taxonomy, posh word for a list. Susan Mickey and her colleagues published a taxonomy of 93 behavior change techniques, which detailed a range of different things in 16 categories. So a lot of the things that you'd expect to be there are there. Help people to set goals. Action planning's there, number 1.4. There's also stuff on monitoring behavior, so keeping track of the weight of the dog, how much you're feeding. And there's all sorts of other things to do with punishment, distraction, identifying the self as a role model. So you see this a lot in weight loss in humans. If you have a successful weight loss journey, that you're prompted to identify yourself as a role model to others to go through this journey. Perhaps we could be thinking about similar things, maybe buddy mentoring systems within owners who've successfully helped their dog to go through a journey. But what I want to end on is by saying we need to map, let's go back. 93 is bewildering, right? So if I printed this out, this is actually only half the page. If I printed out the whole page and gave it to you, you've got a client in front of you. Which of these 93 do you choose? The answer is you use your behavioral diagnosis to make the choice. This was done in this paper in 2008, but it was done in such a complicated way with such a horrible black and white graph that all I want to try and do is get the basic message across. The basic message is that you decide whether your problem is one of motivation, opportunity, or capability, or perhaps all 3. And they're in the columns. Actually, this paper had 11 different reasons why people might not be taking action. And then you've got all your behavior change techniques in rows. And there's a consensus building as to which behavior change techniques help to address which particular problems. And they're the white boxes, so when people agree. So if somebody comes in and they say, I've got a problem, I can't walk my dog because they're mental. Every time they meet another dog, they spin round, they fly off their lead, and I'm worried they're going to run into the road. You've got someone who's got a problem with capability, and experts agree you should be starting with graded tasks. So walk them round the garden, introduce them to a friendly dog, start somewhere gentle. Very different approach if you've got someone who reports a problem of motivation. My dog's happier carrying that weight. He's fine. Leave him alone. There, you're thinking about doing the information, the persuasion, talking about the risks of obesity. So what I want to say is that this is a horrible tool, and I really want to work, and will try and work over the next few years on a user-friendly way where you can type in your behavioral diagnosis into some sort of computer program app, and it spits out some potentially helpful behavior change techniques. I think that would be wonderful and a tool that could be used in practice. If anyone wants to pay me to do that, sorry. I think I'll skip over mode of delivery because actually Jason talked very helpfully about mode of delivery. I think it's, although you didn't frame it in those terms actually, but communication is so crucial here. You can design the world's most perfect intervention, like I did with my volitional help sheet, and then you deliver it in the worst possible way, i.e. at the end of a 20-page questionnaire with no support or help in delivering that, and no framing. You've got a mode of delivery problem. So I just want to bring things together. 56, 55. Seconds, don't panic. I really don't think there's any doubt that behavioral science can be really helpful in understanding and hopefully changing or supporting owners to make changes to their behavior. I don't think that's a new message anymore, and it's so wonderful that now I'm one of many speakers at this conference talking about these things and part of a whole afternoon on it. I've talked you through one approach that's proved popular and useful in other areas, and I really think we could translate it into veterinary science. It's also clear to you probably, and some of you are feeling pretty bewildered and oh my God, there's 93 behavior change techniques, 9 intervention functions, 3 factors that influence behavior, and I've got to do a diagnosis, and I've got 4 minutes with the client. It feels a bit bewildering, and behavioral science, there's a lot of options available to you. I think we need to see that both as exciting and an opportunity, but one that's going to need user-friendly tools to help the veterinary professional, certainly those working in practice, to guide through those tools. I think if we do that within the context of the behavior change wheel, then we have that systematic and principled approach to doing it. And just end with that final plea. Those of you who are doing the good work in this area, please use frameworks like this to report it, because it means you can replicate it. You can say, I did 2.4, and somebody else in France goes, I'll try 2.4 as well. And we all agree what 2.4 means. Yeah? And I'm just going to end with a shameless plug. It's not a shameless plug that's going to make me any money, because Purina are giving away this book for free. But Libby Sheridan's pulled this together. It's a really useful book, 30 pages book on how we move to a behavioral science model. It's got some wonderful articles, a little bit by me, but articles by Jeff French and other people on this behavioral science approach. So it'd be great if you want to hear more about it. Get in touch, have a look at the book. Thank you very much for your attention.